myself, I'm for quite some time a software developer, and I'm also always more about or interested in showing other people how to do stuff like coding and setting up the development environment and stuff. So this is how I came to writing also documentation, and yeah, so nowadays most of what I do is Python, Django stuff, and some data hacking, and also training. So I do like free training. I think stuff is Robert also talking about later, and also commercial training. And yeah, for this training I need material, which I usually license under Creative Commons license, and so it's published on the web, and so I try to work together with other people to translate it into different languages I don't speak. Yeah. So some basics here. I realized that, I just realized that when I came here that not all people may be as familiar with Sphinx, the documentation tool I'm using by Sword. So yeah, there may be some yeah, blind spots. Things, yeah, I have to explain then later on, maybe after the talk. Okay, yeah, so Sphinx is a Python, or maybe who's using Sphinx here? So then I maybe have a, okay, so maybe 1/3 of the people, quarter, not that much. Okay, yeah, so Sphinx is a Python documentation generator, which means it's written in Python, but you don't have to write your stuff in Python or even have to know very much about Python to use it. Because you are using a markup language called structured text, which is comparable to Markdown. You could say it's more powerful, other people would say it's more complicated, so this always depends on what you like best. You have heard from other people that Markdown is very great. Some people say the same about structured text, so yeah, depends on what you like. One thing which is really great about Sphinx is that you have a lot of different output formats, as you can see here. No, sorry, this was wrong. I want to use this here. So you have HTML, which is great for the web, but you can also use PDF or EPUB, manual pages, for example. If you do something which is related to command line tools, and plain text of course too. Text info is something which is related to the new util, so which comes from the Linux side of documentation. Yeah, and you can find our resources on sphinx-org. So there's a website, it has documentation, and you can download it there. And yeah, and I will talk about how to internationalize documentation if you write the documentation in Sphinx. So internationalization is often referred to as I18N, and yeah, one thing you do if you translate your software project is that you don't want to change your code to be able to change the languages or the content. And as I was writing documentation, I also thought that, I realized that maybe the best approach also for documentation, because you have the content of the documentation, so what you really write, and you have all the stuff around it, like markup and organization structure and other stuff. And for example, documentation I write also contains source code, which also should be part of the translation process. And yeah, and Sphinx does support a tool called gettext, which is also coming from the GNU Linux world, and it's widely used there, and the software projects too. And the Sphinx team is using gettext as well to allow you to translate your stuff. Who has used here gettext? Also, less people than Sphinx. Okay, okay, so see how far we come and how much you understand. So this will be the only slide with code, so don't be afraid. It's just a simple example how this stuff works. So the thing is simply you load a catalog here, which is called example, and should be in a directory called locale, and then you import a function. And the important stuff is here, you say print, so something to be printed, and you simply encapsulate the string you want to print inside this function you have imported here, which is simply an underscore, so that you don't have to write as much, that much. And what happens is, if your project, software project or documentation project, whatever, is configured to use a standard language, it simply prints a string you see here. But if you have configured your project to use a different language, German or Italian, Spanish or whatever, then it tries to look up the catalog here in this directory and find a catalog which has the strings for the language you want to use. And then the string is replaced by the translated string. And all the catalogs always have the original string, and then they have an empty space for the translated string. So the translators always get an empty catalog, which only has the original strings, for example here in English, and then you have blanks on the other side, and you can fill in the translated strings. So this is how this works. Yeah, and so how it works is in Sphinx now. This is an image from the Sphinx documentation. So this shows the process, how it is currently more or less, or has been, because at the moment this is changing a lot, because people are working on this and seeing that this has to be improved. This is a relatively new feature of Sphinx. So what you have here is these RST files, which is this restructured text markup language, which is comparable to Markdown, and you have a command called Sphinx build gettext, which creates your POT files, which are like templates for your translation catalogs. And this you can then convert using, for example, a tool called Poodle, but you can also use other tools, which I'll show next, into PO files. And these PO files are the real catalogs. So you have the original sentences or strings, and you can then put in the translated strings. So you could, for example, also then give these files to the translation team. The translation team then can simply translate the contents, and then you get the catalogs back and put them into the documentation project, and then you can render the final documentation using the translated catalogs. Which happens here at the bottom. You have a tool called MSGFMT, message format, which creates the MO files, and the MO files then are used to translate the RST files and create a translated version of your documentation. Okay. So, Sphinx uses a Python file for the configuration. This is an extract of the most important stuff using regarding the internationalization. So you have the set language here, which is the main language of your project. In this case, it's English. And you have to say where your locales are, which is usually a directory called locale, but you can configure this. And you have a new setting, relatively new setting called gettext compact. And this defines where all your documentation goes. So usually you have a root directory with every chapter is a file maybe, and but of course you could also have the root directory, and the root directory could contain subdirectories, and inside the subdirectories could be other files, so that you have a tree of several files in several directories. And with this gettext compact setting, you can switch between having only one catalog for all the files in a subdirectory, or for having a catalog for each of the files. So how many catalogs you want to have, and there is also a proposal for allowing a new setting of gettext compact, which only gives you a single catalog for your whole project. So if you don't care about the strings being in the context of the chapter, maybe they belong to, so you maybe simply say, okay, I want a whole catalog for the whole project, then you can simply put in a string here, maybe in a future version, and simply then the string is the name of the catalog which contains all the files. Okay. So this is how this usually looks if you want to build the internationalized documentation. I'm not going to explain all of this, because this is really, this is terrible. Because this is certainly, I mean, I also have
talk to developers about this, and even developers find this frustrating to use all this stuff here. And if I remember people who have much less to do with all these command line tools and all the programming and this stuff, this may be much more temporary. So so you need better tools here. And one tool which is there is sphinx-intl, which is currently a Sphinx extension, so you have to install it. So Python has a package manager called pip, and you can pip install a additional Python package onto your machine, like you can install Sphinx. But as I said, this is something I have left out here because time's not enough for that. And then the whole amount of stuff you have to do is much less. So you simply have to say make gettext, which creates you all the catalog files, so the POT files, and then you say sphinx-intl update -l which language, so target language you want to have. Like I want a German translation, for example, here because I have English documentation, and you say, okay, where should this stuff go into? And then you can do the translation, so you can ship the PO files to your translation team, or you can do it by yourself, or whatever your translation process is. And in the end, you can say sphinx-intl build, which will create these MO files, because these MO files are binary files, so you can't open them any longer in the text editor. They are not human readable, but they are faster than the text files. And in the end, then you can simply say make. And this is again something bad here, which we need to remove. Make HTML, for example, would simply say, okay, make the HTML version of the documentation, or you could also say make a PDF a LaTeX, and then you would get the PDF version of the documentation. And which is still a problem is this stuff here, because this you need to tell Sphinx, okay, I want the German translation and not the original English translation, because my project is in English. I mean, of course, you could write yourself tools which then insert the string here, but then again, you're writing tools to do your work and not doing your work. Because what I experienced was that when I was doing these documentation projects, I spent a lot of time simply writing tools to getting this whole translation workflow working, and that I don't spend a lot of time in typing in these commands, because you have to do this a lot of times to check out if the documentation really looks like the way you want to look at it, if there are errors in it, and so forth. And if you don't automate this, everything is lost. And especially if you want other people to contribute to the project, you of course have to give them a structure which is easily usable and which you also can document, so that you simply can say, okay, you have to do these three steps, and then you are ready to do translation on the project. Okay, so next thing which makes translation even more, or even less complicated, even more easier, is Transifex. So Transifex is a platform. I'm not related to Transifex in any way, so they also have a commercial option, but they are free for open source projects. So, and I use this only for my open source projects when they don't have to pay, and they also have a business option. Okay, but website is transifex.com, and they offer a online translation service, so tools people doing translation maybe know, like desktop tools. There's free PO edit, but also other commercial stuff is offered by Transifex. So they have everything put in a new, modern, nice web app, and you can collaborate here on the platform on the projects, which is very nice. Because you can then use Transifex on your machine as the maintainer of the documentation, and to put your stuff on Transifex, that the editors do, translators do the work, and later fetch it from Transifex and get it back into your documentation. So how does this work? You again have to use this pip tool to install a different library or tool, Transifex client, and this gives you a command line tool called tx. And the first time you want to use your project with Transifex, you have to use this tx init stuff, and you have to give username and password, and it will create a file in your home directory for the authentication, and it will create a file in the current directory where you are with the configuration for Transifex for your project, which you can also edit later to add new resources to your project. Just a note, I will publish the slides later, so I hope nobody is trying to take notes on all the commands, because too much. Okay, yeah, and then this is now the more or less the same process we saw before, but now together with Transifex. So you again use this sphinx-intl tool to update the configuration of Transifex so that it recognizes your resources you have in your Sphinx project, and then you simply say tx push -s, which means you would to push your source files to Transifex, and then it automatically uploads all the PO files as a source language, as English in this example, to Transifex, and then people on Transifex can simply say, okay, I want to do a translation in this project from English to whatever language I like, and then Transifex creates online the new catalogs for the new language with the English original strings in it, and they can then start translate the project and can then tell you when they're ready, and then yeah, this is this translate stuff on Transifex, and then you simply say tx pull language you want, like German in this example, and then you pull all the German strings from Transifex. They go into your project as you have configured here in the configuration file, which has been done automatically, and then you have all the catalogs from Transifex on your machine, and can, for example, put them in Git or Mercurial or whatever you do to manage your original translation files. And then you can say sphinx-intl build as before and make HTML with the language option as before, and you enter the HTML or PDF version of the documentation. Okay, so here are some tips if you really want to work with Sphinx, if I could convince you, hopefully. And then there are some things which are important to know if you want to write internationalized documentation, because some things are different to the regular Sphinx documentation. Sphinx, yeah, if you regular usage of Sphinx. So one thing which might be obvious is that you should keep all strings like this, or also the name of classes and other stuff you have in your example code in English, because I don't know, if you do your code in Spanish, for example, and you then have a documentation, I don't know, in Russian or so, then maybe people would really have a hard time understand what the source code is about. So one good thing is to have the source code in English, because the source code is not part of the translation. So source code in Sphinx is marked as source code, and Sphinx does not collect the source code because source code must not be translated. So it's not part of the whole translation process. Another thing is how to handle links in Sphinx. You can write links in two different formats. You can say here title of the link with a backtick in front, and then the URL in brackets, again a backtick and underscore, and this in the end is then in a normal HTML a tag, so you can click on it, or in a PDF it's a text with a number on it, and the number is at the bottom of the page with the link, so that you can read it. And yeah, if you do it this way, then everything works, and you can, for example, also translate here the string, because maybe you want to translate the word sources to the language you're writing the translation for. If you do it this way, which is also possible in restructured text, you simply use an alias. So you say at the bottom of the file, okay, this link here should point to this URL. But what happens here is, you translate this to Python Quellen in German, for example, and then restructured text can't find a replacement, and the URL is empty. And this is something I had when I first started with this. All the external URLs of my project were empty because many of these strings had changed, and yeah, all the URLs were gone. So if you really want to have a translation sooner or later of your project, you should always write the URLs in this style and not in the other style, which is shown at the bottom. Another problem I had was that you have, or you want to link, for example, here to the Django documentation, and Django releases a new version every 6 to 9 months, and
so you write your tutorial for Django 1.5, and then Django 1.6 is released, and so you update your tutorial for 1.6, and then you release it again. But of course, you want all the links to change, which before pointed to the 1.5 reference documentation, now should point to 1.6 reference documentation. I think this is something which also may be true for the Opera example we had before, where you also link between different resources. And in Sphinx, you can have something called X-links, where you can simply define a keyword, and this will act as a prefix for all the links. So everything you put in is the %s here. So this would, in the end up as this. So you say Django docs, and then a backtick documentation. So this is the word is displayed, so link is on the word documentation. And again, what's in the brackets here is then what is put here at the end. So you have to cut all URLs manually, but in the end, Sphinx will again glue them together. But this thing here is in the configuration file at the top, and this is inside your documentation files. So this is happening a lot, and this is only a single place. So if you then update to a newer version, or the reference you're referring to is changing, you can simply change the version number here at one single place, and all the links you have around in your documentation magically change too. So this is not really that related to internationalization, but maybe a bit. But as you can, for example, see, Django also has, or maybe will have, multi-language documentation in the future, and you could also use this here for having multi-language links here. Very good job, really very, very good. And another thing you may want to have is that you have special cases where you say, okay, I have a chapter which lists resources which people can use further to work on with the project. And then you may have some of the stuff which is for all languages, and some stuff is only, for example, here for German. So this is German text, and also a link to a German website. So of course this should not be in the English or Spanish or Russian translation, because it's not of use for these people. And there is a handy thing which is built into Sphinx, which is called ifconfig. So this simply means if a config value is this value, and you then simply can refer to all the config values, and language is one of the config values, and you can simply say if the language is German, then display this block, and if it's not German, do not display it. And so you can easily switch inside a page between different languages, because you can't simply say, okay, this page is German only or English only. It makes no sense. Something which may be interesting for people who already use Sphinx, but also for people who maybe plan to use it, and this link check command here can also be used with the languages. This was something I wasn't aware of a few months ago as well. And so what does link check do? Link check walks through your whole documentation and checks if all the links are still working. And if a link is not working, it is reporting to which link is broken. So this is very helpful, because if you have 100 pages of documentation, you can't go to all the pages and click on all the links. But with the link check, Sphinx doesn't work for you, and this is very helpful. And with this language option over here, you can tell Sphinx, okay, now build the German documentation and check the links for the German documentation, which may be different than the links for the English documentation. So what's still missing with Sphinx at the moment for making it working better with internationalization? At the moment, it's not possible to build out languages at once. So you have to build every language in a single step, and then you also have to collect the product of the build and put it somewhere else and build again, because Sphinx is always building to the same target directory. So if you first build English and build German, then the English build is gone and you only have the German build. So this is a little bit frustrating because you wanted to have all the different languages and not only one. So I think Sphinx need a tool in a future version which very simply can say, now build all the translations I have, and also keep the translations you built in the first step, and then add the translations you built in the second, third, and fourth step. Something else which is missing is a landing page. So I think Eric at Read Docs has something similar to that, so there this may not be needed, but or if you use a PDF, you also don't need a landing page because you have the different PDFs in German, English, and so forth. But if you publish your documentation online, you need something like a page where the people first come to and where it's explained that this documentation is available in different languages, because otherwise they maybe end up at the English version or Spanish version and they don't realize that there is a tiny language switch somewhere and that they can switch to an English or Spanish or German version. And so I think at least there should be an option that you have something like a landing page which explains what the project is about and which different languages are available. Then something which would be important would be in translation settings. So at the moment you only have this languages setting, and as I said, you have to use this in all these make commands, and if the Sphinx project would have a translation setting, you could put in all the additional languages you have beside the primary language, and if you would then say, okay, now create the HTML for all of the different languages they have, Sphinx could look at the primary language and all the translations and put everything together. So you have the German, English, Spanish translation all at once. Yeah. And yeah, this is what I already explained when I had the slide about this gettext complex setting, so that you have a single catalog instead of many catalogs, because maybe some projects want only a single catalog for the translation. And what's also missing is a language switch template, which is only important for the HTML stuff, but yeah, this may be comparable to what has been discussed after the Opera talk. You have to make it as easy as possible for your users to consume your documentation, so you also need language switch, where you can simply say, okay, I want the same page in Spanish, English, German, Russian, whatever. And at the moment, there's nothing like that. You have to do this by yourself. And of course, it would be very helpful if Sphinx could provide a template which will need all the list all the translations which will be available in translation, as well as the primary language, so that is automatically created instead of you have to do this by yourself. Yeah. So some of the things which will become in Sphinx 1.3 is that this sphinx-intl extension, which is at the moment a third-party extension, will move into the core of Sphinx, so you don't have to install it in addition. It is then already part of Sphinx. And the Transifex support, which is at the moment in sphinx-intl, will then go into a different extension, a new extension, so that people who don't need Transifex because they have a different translation workflow can simply use Sphinx as it is, and people who want to use Transifex can then install the Transifex edition in addition. Yeah. And the last thing, which is very important and will come with 1.3, and which has some of the things that have already been prepared, is that you can build all languages with a single command. This is what I showed in one of the first slides, where you have these huge commands with all these different options, and so in the future you only have a single command, like, okay, now do the HTML for all languages, do the PDF for all languages, and at the end you have all the PDFs or the HTML for all languages. Yeah, so thanks for listening. I hope it wasn't such a hard time for the people who wasn't that much into programming. I'm very sorry if this was too frustrating for you, but I hope still you may got some insights in things I do and how you can use Sphinx for the translation. So, questions, please.
Can you demo Transifex at all? Like, do you have it on your computer?
Demo, yeah.
Just like, can I show the work, like what it looks like?
Okay, yes.
Yeah. I think Transifex is actually really pretty impressive, so maybe I just think it's kind of a cool example. Questions? If it's going to be hard, don't worry about it.
So can I start already?
Yes, I'm listening.
Thanks.
I'm listening.
All right. First, thanks for the talk. I'm here. Yeah. Just for the sake of comparison, I don't want to undermine the content of your talk. I just want to share an alternative approach to multi-language documentation that has been used by this framework called CakePHP. You can find it on book.cakephp.org. And the point is that they also use Sphinx. They also use RST, but they use it for a PHP-based project.
Yes.
It doesn't matter really. But the point is they did not decide to use the Sphinx built-in internationalization tools because they are, well, for me personally, they're quite frustrating, really. I mean, the scheme with 5 elements, that really is kind of hairy. But so what they did, they just used a very straightforward approach, which I really like, because they just put different languages in different subdirectories, and that's it. And they just made a custom-built makefile. So you just type make PDF -n, and it generates a PDF for English. Then you type make PDF.de, so it generates a German PDF, which is really nice. I mean, it saves you a lot of time, and actually, it's I guess even easier to contribute to, because in the repository they have on GitHub, they have different branches for different versions, so you can download the version you need. And in this branch, you have all those subdirectories nicely put. So if you needed to contribute to a particular language, you know where to find it, and you don't need to learn about Sphinx and those third-party tools and things. So I'm just sharing this experience with you as well. And the other thing I just wanted to tell is that you mentioned PO files and gettext in the context of Sphinx.
Yes.
But of course, the PO files can be used. Outside this context, it's a GNU standard already. And I just wanted to tell all the folks who are not yet using PO files, start using PO files. Because, well, I personally work at a project and we have a lot of legacy code, PHP code, all one. And we used to store our translations in SQL dumps, really in huge files of SQL queries. And we switched to PO, and we cannot be happier because basically. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I think everyone hopefully has understood what to say. The funny thing is that the first question and your second question are very strongly related to each other, and in the end, you gave the answer to your first question or your first remark in your second remark or question. Because what have you said? In the first question you said, okay, yeah, don't use gettext, don't use PO files, simply fork the project and put everything in the second directory. So in the end you end up with several directories with all the different translations in it. And then the next sentence you said, okay, no, don't use gettext, because gettext is so awesome and you need PO files.
So can you guys just talk about this after?
So one thing, because one thing I want to say here is, I know this approach, and maybe this can be a longer discussion afterwards, but what I wanted to say is I really decided against this approach because it has many disadvantages. For example, one disadvantage is that it's very hard for people who don't understand Git and all the other tools to contribute, because you have a platform like this, which makes it much more easier. And so this is one of the main advantages of using this.
Round of applause.